world feels a bit toxic and blah these days, doesn't it? The same old people coming up with the same old solutions for big problems that still don't work. We need to change the game. Well, welcome to Women Advancing. Join me, host Kate Byrne, in this dynamic bi-weekly podcast, bringing together female founders, funders, and thought leaders. Listen to the people driving change, how they got there, how you can help, and yep, how you might just be the next one to advance. Proof that all ships rise with women at the helm. That's what happens when Women Advance with Kate Byrne. So for this conversation, I kind of wish I had a crystal ball sometimes, don't you? Especially when it comes to figuring out where my next opportunities lie. Well, our guest, Allison Elias, who's the assistant professor at University of Virginia's Darden School of Business, focuses on the future of work and women. We're going to take a look at this notion of reflecting on alignment with who you are and what your job does and what your job demands of you. We'll take a little bit of a moment to also talk about roles of our family. And when we're making decisions and when we're talking with our partners about what our shift is going to be, who's going to take the lead out in the workplace, we're going to look at what's beyond job performance. And of course, we're going to adjust and address the gap, gender gap, once again, in AI. Is it friend or foe? It could really be our friend, but that's up to us. We got to roll our sleeves up and jump in. So come in, take a listen, see what you learn. Welcome, Allison Elias, assistant professor at University of Darden's School of Business. And your specialty is future of work and women. So glad to have you here at Women Advancing.
Thanks for having me, Kate.
This has been a conversation I've wanted to have for a while. And before we go on with what's going on in the world, I want you to share a little bit of your story. Everyone feels like and assumes that everybody's path is so linear and vertical. And I'd love to just hear a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, became interested in women and gender issues. A couple things. One was most of my friends' moms didn't work, and my mother didn't work. And there was this one guy I was friends with, and his mom was like a bank executive, and she always showed up to school like, just looking very glamorous. And I remember just kind of being in awe of the sort of difference, not that working is glamorous, but there was just this distinction that, obviously back then when everyone went to the office and things, you had to be, appear the right way in certain industries. And that just, I don't know why it struck me from a young age, but I just found her kind of fascinating. And the other thing was that I remember starting junior high and my mother said, Allison, you're in sixth grade now, you can babysit. And, she kind of started booking me these neighborhood babysitting jobs. And I was the worst babysitter. Like I would show up and I was sort of terrified of these children. Like they kind of ran all over me. I remember having kind of a pit in my stomach. I was the youngest of four. So I'd like never really been in that kind of older sibling role. And I said, Mom, I don't think babysitting's for me. I really would rather mow yards, like my brother. And, he makes more money anyway. And,
there you go.
My father's super traditional and is like, no, like you're not mowing yards, like, And
the young lady doesn't do that.
Yeah. And I just, a couple of things just kind of intrigued me with gender and work. And, as I went into school, just kind of gravitated towards those issues.
Yeah. Well, so now what skills did you rely on in early days of your career versus what you rely on now?
So I have a bit of a, like you said about the linear path, I have a bit of within academia, a bit of a transition. So my PhD is in history, and I studied women's history, which was a really fascinating sort of way of thinking about women's voices and storytelling and the way the grand narrative is shaped by the present. So, kind of these methodological ideas of like what counts as history. How do we know what we know about the past? And I taught history for a few years at Cornell, and then I felt like I was more interested in contemporary issues and just sort of wanted to have an impact in a sort of a different way with my interest in gender, and was able to do a few postdocs at business schools and transition into teaching, gender, communications, negotiations, those kinds of issues in a business school. And so I would say that when I was doing that sort of transition in my 20s, saying yes to everything was the way to go, because, you're kind of just trying to get new opportunities to expand yourself, and, whoever will sort of take you on and show you things, that's kind of where, you kind of, it's worth your time. It's kind of worth the risk that maybe it doesn't turn out to be a great learning experience. And I think now at Darden, we're so blessed with the just success of our business school, and the demands on faculty are really high. And so I think I've sort of transitioned from, yes, I'd love to participate, yes, I'd love to do that, to does this kind of fit into, my kind of career, sort of story. And
Right.
and I think that's, just kind of a difference as you're starting to try to, kind of get in somewhere and sort of make it, and you're emerging, you kind of have to be the yes person. And then you sort of, once you feel a little stabilized, you get to start saying no, which is nice.
Which is terrific, because I think that's an incredibly important skill, is the notion of discernment, right?
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
The like reflection of alignment. I kind of think the word alignment always comes up for me. And I think my younger self, I felt like just the more things I could put on my CV or resume, the better. And now it's like, what sort of tells a story of a strength down a certain path? Like I don't have to be everything. I don't have to, I don't know. Sometimes even here at Darden, I get asked to like go teach something different, which, it's not that I don't want to learn more or teach something different, but, why should I be the, like stretching into that area? Is that going to kind of enrich, kind of my spot and my, my story, or is that gonna kind of take me off into a place where, I don't know, I'm feeling too thinly sort of stretched everywhere, I guess.
I think that's really true. It's kind of like, okay, great. Is this just a version, another way of people pleasing, which we right? Which we so awesome do. And should I do this? Maybe it could. It's not like, could I, to your point. It's like, of course you could, but it's more, does that work for me? Which is fantastic. And that's a terrific way of actually really holding on to one's power.
Yeah.
In a
It
format.
really is being able to, say no and have that insight.
I realized that I addressed my career in many ways. Back when I was in sixth grade, we all went to dancing school and learned how to do dance, ballroom dance. And I can remember we were told you always have to say yes when a boy asks you to dance. You have to say yes.
Wow.
Yep. And I swear to you, it dawned on me the other day. I said this to my daughter. I think I've probably in some ways approached my career that way. When someone asks me to take something on, to your point, I've said, sure. And then you just everyone ends up kind of losing in a way, especially if it's not
Right.
to your point, it's not in alignment and it doesn't really help.
Right. And it comes from a place of feeling inadequate, or like you have to make yourself available, kind of. That's an interesting story about saying yes to boys. I mean, with the sort of maybe understory being like, you want somebody to like you and you don't know who's going to like you. And
Exactly. all those frogs, um, so to speak. So that's kind of an interesting segue into this whole notion of, the evolving workplace, right? And there are going to be so many, especially given new administration, not being political at all, just stating a fact. There are going to be certain demands. We've already started seeing it coming. What do you see as some of the most critical changes regarding how we work, especially for women, since as much as we want to see our partners are getting more aware and we're doing some sharing of responsibility, still nonetheless, a lot of it often falls on us.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that I mean, obviously, since COVID, we're all sort of more remote. We're all able to use technology and Zoom better to connect. And so I suppose I don't think there's really a turning back. I mean, I think to some extent, some industries and organizations are really trying to force people back in the office, but I think there's still going to be an element of, even in those sort of mandated in-person jobs, there's kind of at least for professional employees, an element of being able to, if you do have an emergency come up, like join on Zoom or, maybe cancel a work trip and join remotely. So I guess I just think there's still just a lot of navigating with that and thinking through, if you're going into a certain organization or industry that is highly dependent on sort of in-person interactions, I think that, like, I see the MBAs here really consider that strongly as to whether they want to kind of take that on, or that's not for them. And I just think employers, as we, new generations keep popping up, I'm not sure employers can go back to.
I agree. And what you just made me think about too is, and I think of my daughter who works as a government job. And so she's, down in Durham and it's remote and it's
Right.
going to be difficult for her. Right. And so, what does that look like? And it makes me think of, Doge, the new, the Office of Efficiency. And in so many ways, it is actually, I think, often more efficient because you save those commute hours from not
Yeah.
having, right? Not to
It
mention,
is a big, like, I think back to COVID and we were all teaching online. And I mean, yes, there were things lost not being in person and obviously like some, loss of connection, relationships, kind of flourishing. But yeah, wow, it was an efficient day. Like, I mean, no one wanted to be held at home all day, but there did seem to be a lot of time.
and you do get a lot done. And this makes me think about this whole notion of frankly, the impact of technology. Remember how early days people were sort of freaking out about Zoom or anything kind of like that. Now
Right.
everyone's sort of old hand at it. So of course, now the next big, well, it's not even the next, it's been around in our lives forever and people just haven't recognized it or didn't call it out. But with AI, I'm still trying to figure out, and in your eyes, I'd love to hear, friend or foe in terms of opportunities for women and challenges in the workplace. I mean, I think there's this gap, right? There's a gender gap right now. I don't know that it will always be there, but I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on that. Like, why is that? And
Yeah.
is it helpful or not?
I think the gender gap is so interesting in AI use. And ever since I heard about that a few months ago, I just started kind of paying attention to even myself and even, within academia, we're all scrambling, like, what are we going to do? And, how do we test students now that they can use AI and all of these things? And it seems like whoever you kind of interact with it becomes normal. So like, it's very, like, I was on the phone with a colleague a couple of weeks ago. We're doing some research and she's like, I'm going to be ahead of this. She's like, I'm not going to be, the like older female professor that doesn't know how to use AI. I'm like, she was telling me all about like, here's how I'm using it. Here's what I'm doing. And it actually kind of inspired me to be like, you know what, I'm going to start paying attention too, instead of letting, I think part of how I was feeling about it, and I can't speak for all women, but was like, I'm going to let the experts figure it out. And then someone can kind of tell me what to do or how I should be implementing this in my work. And, we know from research, I mean, men do tend to be, take risks more, maybe that means like, I'm going to try this out. I have confidence that I can master this. I don't have to feel afraid of it. As fearful as I am about like all the bad things that could be done with it, there's a lot of good things for equity and diversity and, equality for gender. And so I think that, we just have to harness it in the right way, just like any new technology. And there will be, stories of, times when that fails. But I sort of see it as a long line of previous technologies and maybe it's a lot different, but at this point, I think women have to jump in and just try it out.
Agreed. And to me, given that I do think there is, well, younger generation, plus I do feel women also tend to be more collaborative. And
Yeah.
certainly in learning styles and in institutions like Darden, people are, you do so much teamwork.
Yeah.
That's how I chose to view ChatGPT was
Yeah.
you're just a collaborator. You're going to help,
Yeah.
kind of help not coach me at all, but just if I've got questions or I need some direction, I can take it or leave it. That's the main thing I think everyone has to realize. We can't let go of critical thinking.
That is really important. And actually, as a teacher, I sort of see that that's where it obviously can go astray as people, you can tell who turned in assignments that were just almost so perfectly structured and sort of worded, but like they were kind of vapid, like there was nothing underneath them, or like this analysis wasn't there. And so I think you're exactly right that like if you want to use that to try to prep for something for class, that's fine. But it's sort of like a discussion where you have to kind of have another round of discussions or in your head about it.
Exactly. You can't just completely take as is.
Right. Right.
So that's one of the things too. The whole notion of intergenerational, multicultural differences, and I'm sure your classes now must be very different from how they were, but also workplaces are so different. How
Yeah.
is it, the power of, the power struggles or the dynamics with power and innovation and communication? How have they all been impacted? Obviously, greatly, and created some chaos, I know.
I mean, to take this back to our first, sort of discussion about workplace evolutions, I just tend to still see the tension there between what it means to be committed to your job. So for example, I coach students in negotiating their offers, and I regularly have students who say that they're going to like negotiate work from home time, or that's something that they're going to ask about in an interview. And I think that is really, I sort of just want them to understand that could be a risky choice, right? Like, hey, if that's your priority, that, go ahead and ask. And I said that to a student. I said, that's fine if you want to ask a huge technology company about that, but just know that depending on who you're talking to, it could signal that you're not as committed as someone else. He said, I don't care. I want a good work-life balance. And if they're not okay with me asking to leave I think he wanted permission to leave at 4 some days, or I don't know. He had a certain thing he wanted. He's like, then that's not the right company for me. And wow, that struck me as really interesting. First of all, it's a man who is prioritizing, work-life balance, who doesn't even have kids yet, but he was thinking ahead about that. And he sort of like, there was this notion of like, that's as far as I'm going to commit to the company. Like it's not my, my identity is not tied up in 100% commitment. I have these other aspects of myself I want to nurture and, that I want to flourish.
I find that fascinating because having come, from the Bay Area, where so many people collect a company name for your
Right.
CV.
Right.
So, collect all the gold stars and this
Right.
whole big gold brand. I find that fascinating. It sounds very European with regards to
Yes.
that whole notion, having worked with Norwegians in particular myself. That struck me, and they've been doing it fine forever. But it's the whole notion of that balance, right? That work-life integration. I know we did a cover a long time ago in Fast Company, and it was all about how balance is bunk. I mean, can someone really have, the age-old debate, right? Work-life
Yeah.
balance. And are there things from a policy standpoint, although policy might be too strict, that companies could and should be doing to ensure that, women can actually thrive, I'll say, or flourish in a workplace? Do they even care anymore? Because I know so many people, so many corporates, large ones, especially large ones who have very diverse populations, like a Walmart, right? Who are
Right.
backstepping on any kind of commitment to that.
It's so interesting to me because like some of these top consulting firms, they offer like unlimited paid vacation and things like that. But, are you permitted to take it? And I think this is kind of the tension between, you could make a policy about something, you could pass a law about it, but in a capitalist system, there, where things are structured the way they are in the US to reward overwork in terms of salary as well as promotions, if you do take 6 weeks off, if that's what is allowed at your company or unlimited, again, are you going to be like this generational problem? It actually kind of goes to that generational problem. Like, is that going to be seen as you're committed, you're working as hard as you can? And I think people are trying to have creative ways to like solve this. So, like in corporate law, like if you take a parental leave, how could you, maybe be moved to like fewer projects, but still be able to be engaged in one project, to kind of continue your advancement? It's really tricky. And I saw something recently about, a man at Goldman Sachs who's suing in the UK for, I guess he took 6 months leave and is being fired. I don't know the whole story, so I don't know if there's sort of other aspects to his dismissal, but, suing kind of for gender discrimination, that like, Goldman would not have overtly fired a woman for being on parental leave for this long. But the backlash in terms of like comments online about him were really also interesting to me, that like we really do have this generational difference in terms of what it means to be committed, and some of it's based on gender, but some of it's also just due to what it used to mean to work hard, which was be in your office and be available.
I still remember that at Gray Advertising. It was always, everybody was waiting. There were people that just stretched whatever their work was out throughout the day, so it went longer, so they could say, "Oh yeah, I stayed till 7:30." And I kept thinking that was so dumb. I had a boss, and he was definitely a go-getter, but he literally from 3 until 7 wrote a letter. And I thought, wow, how is it that you are 2 to 3 rungs above me? And then that was after I had given him an outline to follow. So I thought, oh my gosh, all you had to do was add the in-between part. It's just amazing to me, I think. And that's really interesting regarding the parental leave. Because here, finally, we do have somebody who is taking it. We want everybody to be able to take it.
Yeah.
But God forbid you do it at your own risk.
And one editorial I read from a professor at Toronto was saying that, these ideas of masculinity are so baked into our ideas of hard work, because to be able to work that hard, someone else is helping to take care of you, and your dependents. And so if we punish men for not upholding that ideal of masculinity, then, we're not going to be able to have gender equality. And so it's really actually even requires more of a transformation in terms of a corporate culture or policies supporting it, because it's very hard. It's one thing to, kind of try to treat women differently, but then to transform the whole culture for men and other genders also is really, really tough.
Yeah, it's a whole systemic approach, because you also have to, in your social circles, right? People have to be supportive of it as well.
That is true. There's a really interesting paper that came out a couple years ago. It was really based on this woman's story. She told me about, basically she got married and had a child, and her husband didn't want to move for her academic job. And so, and it was basically like, what she ended up doing research into was all the like other family members who kind of play into these notions. So it's not just necessarily a negotiation between like romantic partners or married partners, but the kind of other voices that are coming in with opinions. I mean, maybe not directly, but that actually has a large maybe influence on how somebody kind of manages these career family tensions. And I thought that was a really interesting line of research that she kind of developed out of her own experience.
I love that. And because it takes into account, just beliefs and practices that we all ourselves adopt, but they aren't even ours. I mean, we see this a lot with women and money, frankly.
Yeah.
Right. And if we're, how we earn it, do we earn it? Do we save it? Do we give it away as soon as we get it? Who manages it? culture as well.
Yeah.
How many people are one person at work and then they have to go backwards like 3 generations when as soon as they walk in their front door
Right.
to that other role. It's a really complex thing. And I think that I had not thought about the role of the family in that sense.
Yeah, that like we're all products of these, different circles we've been a part of, and I think sometimes those are more vocal voices or more enduring for some people than others.
Absolutely. You spend a lot of time with, young professionals who are, coming back to school and with hopes of actually climbing in the rungs and getting bigger.
Mhm.
What advice would you give to women who are, I'm not going to say just starting, but coming now, stepping out of business school, graduate degree, and they want to aspire to leadership roles? Like how can they prepare?
Yeah, I actually just had some women talk about this. My elective finished up, and they said, what I really loved about this class is I had never thought about things beyond my sort of job performance as maybe indicative of supporting me or helping me advance. And I think there's it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. I mean, the Sheryl Sandberg book was all about how women kind of take themselves out of the fight, before it even starts. So they kind of like plan maybe their career to be on a different track and all of that, which is sort of old research. But I think women who feel very ambitious and they feel like they know they want to advance, to an extent in their careers, they hopefully are starting to think about what does that mean as far as choices about partners or kids? And, maybe I want to select somebody who is going to be supportive of that. And I mean, I even had a friend in finance tell me, like, I don't want to marry another finance guy. I'm actually looking for someone, who has career ambition and interest, but like I want to be the primary, kind of career in the family. And so I think people are realizing that it would be very hard for two people to pursue these types of like up and out careers in banking or consulting. And I think women are like realizing that, and they're sort of like, okay, so if I know I really want to be a partner at an MBB firm, what am I going to do as far as planning reproductive, doing egg freezing, either finding the right partner now, or maybe I'm not worried about finding a partner now. So I think women are just thinking a lot more about all of these, you could
Realities.
say, realities that play into career advantage.
I also think that what you come up with now,
Mhm.
knowing what you know now, it's the context. So
Yeah.
you get out, you do that, you get going, yay, great, fine. It may shift, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You may decide you want to hit pause. It doesn't mean it's forever at all.
Right.
You may go right back in and you may reinvent yourself, or there may be another kind of industry that actually those skills that you have and that you are excellent at can be plopped right into a whole other industry that may serve that next chapter of you,
Right.
and what that looks like.
Yeah. And it's such a good point. I mean, we finishing up a case with a student about an alum maybe 10 years ago who went into, one of these top consulting firms, and her husband did too. And then she actually pivoted out into entrepreneurship, and the kind of failure she felt because of she felt so, I guess so much of her identity was that she was one of the people who got one of these very elite jobs. And, just the negotiation with her husband and having to figure out who was going to move off of this track. And I think it's really interesting in terms of, like you said, trying on different selves and thinking about how maybe you can make a plan now, but it might change and you might not know how you're going to feel in 10 years. You could try to plan for it, but.
Right. And you know who you are now.
Right.
But as you go through all these other work experiences, as in that case too, you might realize, well, you know what? This happened to me where I thought, oh, I want this. And then I got it.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, what was that? This is so not my thing. I mean, can I do it? Sure. Am I a quitter if I don't? No. Is it okay that I don't like that? That's the piece, right? Am I a failure? Am I a wuss? Am I not intelligent? Am I being
Right.
Am I hurting it for hurting other women?
Yeah, she kind of felt like, as a woman of color, like she needed to fight the fight. And what was interesting too about the case when we did the interviews is she had just some bad experiences on teams and with projects. And the discussion among the students was like, well, the way her husband reported his experiences at the same firm were all very positive. And so was that just sort of like people were treating him differently, or he just saw it in a different way? Or did she just kind of like, was it actually there was this big disparity and she kind of was unlucky to, be on a few teams that, were not supportive of, her whole self? And it obviously no answer to that, but just you don't know how you're going to navigate through what you choose next, and what could end up happening.
Exactly.
With those
Exactly. Yeah.
situations.
And also the next one might be different.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. Don't like glue yourself in. And believe
Right.
me, live in a very glass house when it comes to this, but
Right.
it's so much easier said than done.
Yeah.
And it does, especially when you have had such a bad visceral experience. Try and find courage sometimes. If it seems like it could be a chance to actually overcome that fear, what would you tell your younger self?
I would say don't be afraid to be vulnerable and ask for help and sort of depend on somebody to help lift you up. I remember kind of thinking, even in academia, that this idea of like networking or trying to build professional relationships, I just kind of felt like, well, I wanted to be an academic because I don't want to be part of that world, And I think that what I've learned is that world is kind of everywhere. And that's even how academia works is, your productivity can be a lot tied to relationships. And so I think just I sort of saw like getting work done and professional relationships as really distinct circles previously. And I think that I would tell my younger self to not overlook the power of them to overlap and how that could be helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just reading about Ev Williams, one of the
Mm,
co-founders of Twitter,
yeah,
and he has just started a new social media. I think it's called Motzi, I think. Anyway, and it's all about actually driving in real life connection.
yeah,
And I think to your point, you still need people. It's just, no getting around that. And that's especially on the one hand, I always smile. We all freak out about, oh my gosh, AI, it's going to take jobs away. Where's the humanity? And then now we need the humanity. So this is exactly it. Those little networking things. And guess what? Everybody, for the most part, I don't care, even the most extrovert of extroverts, there are times you just don't even want to have to deal.
yeah.
But I have also found that every time I felt that way, if I just gutted it out and went, there's an amazing person that I met. It's like, okay, I'm so glad I went in the long run.
Yeah, and like, how can you think about this? I think I always thought of them as icky, and how could you think of them as just a connection, like any other type of positive relationship? Like, I wonder what drives this person or motivates them, or how are we going to end up having similarities or not? So could you look at it as like a curious inquiry instead of like having to be transactional and get something out of it this moment?
Yeah, I was just going to say relational versus transactional.
Yes,
It is
yes.
all about curiosity.
Yeah,
And if for that matter, think of it, hey, I wonder who I could help. Put
yeah,
it right. And then I guarantee you're going to find someone who's going to help you probably before you even come up with that yourself.
yeah.
So speaking of help, where do you see the greatest opportunities now for women moving forward? Because it could really, I think, benefit from your insights.
That's really tough. I think that the sort of use of AI is really important, because if women kind of stay out of the development of AI and the conversations about it, there could be just a lot, sort of, not that it would be totally different, but we need everyone at the table to help develop and implement all of this. I think that careers, actually, the type of careers women want are more often now the type of careers that, very accomplished men also want. And so I think that actually could be beneficial. And I guess it remains to be seen to what extent, as people just age and a new generation kind of takes over those leadership and, sort of powerful roles, whether much will change in terms of how work gets done.
So and this will be, we'll finish on this note, and that is this. We sort of started off talking a bit about, storytelling, that kind of thing, and sort of the story, the career narrative that you have. One of the pieces that I'm really working on with Women Advancing in this series is sitting down and speaking with the female leaders of a number of serious media outlets. And I'm just really curious, and I'd love to hear your take on this. Do you think having more women in those senior roles, will there be an impact, a shift, a change of either the stories that are told or how stories are told and the directions that they take?
Yeah, I hope so. And I would like to think so. I think that I'm really glad you brought this back to stories, because I think that women can make the most change just through telling their story and sort of using their voice. And I'd like to think that as more women are in leadership roles, certain concerns and stories will be more welcome. I mean, obviously that's not always true. A lot of times, particularly if there's very few women, then women want to sort of conform to whatever the dominant paradigm is, because they don't want to be different or be seen as, lesser than, similarly situated men. But I would like to think that as more women rise into leadership, that sort of what remains top of mind for companies and organizations will have to shift somewhat, even if implicitly, and even if in a way that's somewhat gender neutral and not, targeting or specifying, women in particular.
No, I still remember, and it completely dates me. I can remember when Carly Fiorina, way back when, was the first female CEO, go figure, of a tech company, HP.
Yeah.
And I will never forget, and this quote really stuck with me. And she just said, everyone said, "So what's your wish? How do you feel?" And she said, "I look forward to the day when me becoming a CEO of anything isn't news."
Yeah.
And I think slowly we're kind of getting there. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But with people more like you teaching, for sure we will.
Well, thank you. That's kind. I hope so. I think that you're right, that if we can get to a spot where the first question to female leaders isn't like, what's it like to be a woman and a leader, as if the identities are incompatible. But I think we're not there yet. So it's important to still have the discussion and not, try to push it underground.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, Allison, thank you so much for making time out of your crazed day. I really appreciate it. And
thanks for having me.
I look forward to continuing the conversation in a number of different ways that will be shared later.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks for listening. May this episode inspire you to move forward. Be sure to go to iTunes, Spotify, katebyrne.co, that's KATEBYRNE.co, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and listen to even more episodes. Here's to strong women. May we know them, may we be them, may we raise them. And be sure to meet them on the next Women Advancing. Ta till next time.